Now that we have an understanding of how models and migrations work together to build our application structure, let's go ahead and walk through a real-world example by setting up migrations for an actual database schema. So right here we have the basic structure that we're going to be working with here today, setting up via migration. So we have our users and roles tables that we already created in our previous lesson. We have an additional profiles table, posts, states, topics, and post topic table. Go ahead and hide that back over to the side here. So since we already have our users and roles here set up, we can skip straight on to profiles. So let's go ahead and create a profile migration. So with the AdonisJS extension installed within Visual Studio Code, we can do Command or Control Shift P to go into the command palette. We can do ace, make, and then we can go straight into model since we know that we can create a model and a migration at the same time. Let's go into there. This will be called profile for the model name. And let's go ahead and have it make a migration for us. We'll skip over controllers and factories for right now. All right, so we have our profile model and migration created. Let's go ahead and run through creating the rest of the files, and then we'll go through and fill them out. So thinking through the flow that we need to create this logically in order for our migrations to successfully run via the relationships, we know that we need to create states before our posts because the posts relies on the relationship of the state ID. So let's go ahead and create our states table next. So we can go back into here. We can create a model for this as well. We can call this state. Hit enter on that. We can go ahead and create a migration. We'll skip on controller and a factory for that as well. You might be getting failed notices here, but it does look like everything is succeeding. We do have our files over here being created, so I'm just going to keep exiting these out. It could be because we're running on an older version with this specific project, and I do need to go through and update those versions to the latest. So now that we have our states created, we can now actually go through and create our posts. So let's do post next. Let's do make model, call this post. We'll have a migration for that. We'll skip on everything else for right now. We can go ahead and close those back out since they successfully created. And then logically next, we need to create our topics in order to create our post topic because the post topic contains the post ID and the topic ID. So it's going to rely on those two tables already existing in order to set up that foreign key. So let's go ahead and do the topics next. So we'll do make model. Call this topic, hit enter on that. Let's create a migration and skip on the other two. And lastly, we can finally do our post topic, which is our many-to-many pivot table that will bind our posts to the topics. And it will allow us to have many posts with many topics and many topics with many posts. Now, whenever it comes to creating this one, since it's a many-to-many pivot table, we don't necessarily want a model for it because whenever it comes to relationship time within our models, we can just set this up as a many-to-many, set this specific pivot table that we need to use for that relationship, and then we could just bypass the many-to-many table altogether. So all that we need here is the actual migration. So we can do make migration on this specific one, and let's just call it post topic. I'm going to put an underscore in between the two. Hit enter on that, and then we'll just be using the default database that our project is set up with, so we just hit enter there. It will indeed create a table, and let's call that table post topic. Hit enter on that. All right, there we go. So we have all of our models and migrations created now. Now we can go ahead and start filling those two out. So let's first dive into our profiles. So over here on the right hand side, we can see that our profiles has a user ID, a biography, an avatar created at and updated at. Now whenever it comes to the avatar, we're going to be using attachment light to actually create that. So the documentation for that does state that it's best to create those particular files as JSON columns. So we'll be following that recommendation here within this series. So let's go ahead and create these columns. So let's do table.integer for our user ID. So user underscore ID. Now, whenever you do increments, by default, that's going to be an unsigned integer. So we do need to specify that within our relationship here. So let's do unsigned there. Let's specify that this references ID in the table users. And we also want to set that to not nullable because a profile does require somebody to have a user. In terms of biography, it does matter what type of column type you do, depending on how long you want the biography to be. In our use case, I think 255 characters is a pretty standard limitation for a biography. You don't want them to write a full blog post about who they are. So let's go ahead and just set that up as a string, find that as biography, and then we just use the max column length there, and then that can be nullable, so we can leave that as is. And then it comes time for our avatar, and we just spoke about this just a moment ago. We do want to specify this as a JSON type since we'll be using attachment light. Set that up as avatar, and then that will be nullable as well. And then we have our timestamps, so we are okie dokie there. Next, we have our states, which is nice and simple. So let's go ahead and do table.string. This just has a name, and that should be not nullable because if you have a state without a name, then it really doesn't have a purpose. So let's go ahead and give that a save. Then we move on to our posts, where we have a user ID, a state ID, title, slug, description, body, thumbnail, updated at, and created at. So again, just like the avatar, our thumbnail is going to be using attachment light. So we'll go through and set that up as a JSON column there as well. So we have table.integer. This will be user underscore ID. Again, this is an increments column, so it'll be unsigned. References ID in the table users, and we do want to set that up as not nullable because a post does need an author. And then let's do table.integer.state underscore ID dot unsigned references ID in table states. And we want this to be not nullable because our states are going to be either public, unlisted, or private, and we definitely want a value on what specific state the post is in there. So let's go ahead and move on from there. We have our title, so that's going to be a string title. I can't think of a use case where we'd want the title to be able to go over 100 characters, so we'll go ahead and set the text limit there to 100. All right, and we have a table.string called slug. And now we'll be auto-generating this slug using Lucid Slugify. So it's going to take our title and make it URL safe. So it's going to be slightly longer than the title, so we don't want to specifically set it to 100 characters in case somebody sets the max to 100 for their title. So we do want to give a little bit of leeway there. So I think maybe 150 is probably a safe bet there. Then we have our description. Same with the biography here. It does depend on how long particularly you want the description to be. I think 255 is definitely a decent max for that. So let's go ahead and just set it up as a string instead of a text. And now we have that body, and now this is the one where you don't want to limit them specifically to just 255 characters. You want them to be able to go onward as far as they need to go to fulfill their post body. So for this, we do want to do a text type here, and this is just a long form string. We really don't need to worry about a user running into the limit with this particular column type. So let's set that up as body, and that will be just fine there. Now, I did miss a couple of things here. So our title and our slug do need to be not nullable because in order for a post to exist, we don't want these to be null. So let's set that up as not nullable, particularly because in order to actually go to the route, we're going to use the slug to link to it. So we definitely need a slug in order to actually link to a post. Okay, and then lastly, we have that JSON type for our thumbnail. This is just going to be a thumbnail image for the actual post. So again, we're going to be using attachment light for that, which is why we set that up as a JSON type, and that will be nullable, so we can just leave that off. Okay, next up we have our topics, and for this one we have a table, string, name. Let's go ahead and limit this one to 50 because you really don't want a topic name to be super long. 50 characters is a pretty good limit for that, I think. And if you ever do run into a use case where you need to extend it longer, you can definitely do that via a migration. Just alter the column max length and you'll be good to go. Then we have a slug, which is going to be generated based off of that name, similar to how the post slugs are going to be generated off of the title. So we do want to give a little bit of additional leeway here. So I'm going to say 85 is probably a pretty safe length there. You might want to be extra safe and just go double the amount of the name, but it's not like somebody's going to go through and name their topic A space A space A, which would be really the only use case where they would run into that limit. So we should be good with 85. And then we have a description. So just like all of the other descriptions, it does depend what column type you use based off of the length that you want that to be. And we do want these two here to be not nullable as well for the exact same reason as our post. We'll be using that slug to link to it, and you can't link to it if it doesn't have a slug. Alrighty, so there is our topics. Lastly, we have our post topics. And for this one, all that we have is a post ID, topic ID, and a sort order. So the post ID and the topic ID are going to relate it to the two different sides of that many-to-many relationship for whatever usage there. And then we can use that sort order as an intermediary pivot column to determine what sort we want the topics to be on the post in case there's any specific order that you want them to be pulled through with. That might not be a real world usage. It really probably doesn't matter what order topics come in, but I did want something to show, hey, here's how you can manipulate and include an intermediary column on your many-to-many pivot tables. So we have a table, integer. This is going to be our post ID. That will be unsigned since we are working with an increments column. References, ID, in table, posts, and we do want that to be not nullable. Same thing with our topic ID. We have topic underscore ID, unsigned there. References, ID, in table, topics, and not nullable. Again, the references in table portion of this is setting up our foreign key, which is why there's a specific order that you do want to do your migrations in here. Otherwise, you'll run into an error whenever you attempt to run your migrations. And that foreign key is going to give us safety in terms of the IDs that we're actually using. So for example, whenever we set up a post ID foreign key here, we're specifying that this table cannot include a post ID that does not exist within our posts table. So that's what the foreign key is doing for us. It's giving us some safety there and knowing that if we have this post ID in this particular post topic table, we know that it exists within our post table and we'll be able to find it. If we attempt to delete it out of our post table, we're going to get a foreign key constraint error and we won't be able to delete it from our post table without first deleting it from our post topic table. All right, and then lastly, we do have that integer for our sort order. So let's put that in here. That'll just be a basic integer sort order. Now, there's really no use case where we're going to want to go negative with a sort order, so we can also specify this as unsigned to save us a little bit of space there. And then if we wanted to, we can set this up as not nullable and default it to 1. Perfect. So we have all of our migrations set up. Now, one last thing, just like we did with our roles where we did this defer to actually create those out, we also want to do the same thing here for our states since we have a specific set of states that we do want to always have within our table. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive down into our states. And let's go ahead and in our up, let's do this defer async. Let's grab that database. And we do await db.table, this table name multi-insert, add an array there with an object. And now let's go ahead and set up an enum for this, just like we did with the roles. So let's go within our enum, new file, and let's call this states.ts. Let's do enum states, and then we'll have public as 1, unlisted as 2, and then private as 3. And then let's go ahead and export default our states. Give that a save. Now we can jump back down into our states migration within our this defer. And then just like we did here with our roles, we're going to explicitly set the actual ID value. In most cases, you don't want to do this, but in this case, since we do have an enum mapping for that actual ID value, we do want to always make sure that the actual enum value matches what's in the database. So we're going to explicitly set that here with our states as well. So let's go ahead and specify ID states dot, and then we'll have public. The name for that will just be public. And then we'll also have another one, ID states dot unlisted, name unlisted, and we have one more, ID states dot private, and the name for that will be private. So public here is going to be, we'll actually want to list it out on our site so that people can easily find it and read it. Unlisted is going to be, we probably don't want it to show up for any old user on our site. It's just going to be, if we copy the link, send it to somebody, they'll be able to go to it and read it. Private is going to be private to just the poster. So only I or whoever posted it would be able to actually go to it and read it. So nobody else outside of the author set would be able to actually view the post. Awesome. So now that we have everything here set up, let's go ahead and run our migration. So let's jump into our ACE commands and do migration and run. All right, awesome. So it looks like all of those ran successfully. So if we were to dive into our database here, we would now see all of those additional tables here. So we have our post topic, post profiles, roles, states, topics, and users ID, in addition to those 2 schema-based versions that Adonis comes with out of the box. So in the next lesson, we'll start taking the columns that we defined here within our migrations today, and we'll move them over into our models so that we're good to move on to relationships and our CRUD work.